All right. Okay. So I'm going to get started. My name is Amy, and I'm the public programs manager at the museum. If you haven't been to the museum, you should really go. It's really cool. We're located in downtown Brooklyn in a decommissioned I&D subway station, and we're open now from Thursday to Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We also have our gallery in Grand Central Terminal. Admission is free, and if you want to go see this exhibit in person after learning about it today, they're open Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 6 p.m. And it's right along one of our amazing stores, which you should also visit. So we have captions enabled. If you need to use them today, you can go to captions or the three dots at the bottom of your screen and click captions and then show captions. Also, we will leave some questions for Jodi at the end. Feel free to add them to the chat during the presentation and I'll share them out to her at the end. So today, I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, the Transit Museum and curator of this exhibit, and really all the exhibits at the museum, Jodi Shapiro. Jodi is a lifetime New Yorker. She started working at the New York Transit Museum Archive in May 2014 and became associate curator in 2016, curator in June 2021. She's curated shows about the Second Avenue subway, the IRT Flushing line, New York's transit system in comics, and Fair Collection, just to name a few. She can be frequently seen given gallery talks, showing people the treasures of the museum's collection or riding on one of the vintage trains. You might also see her featured in an interview or two. Before she joined the Transit Museum, had many jobs. She was a data wrangler, a record label stooge, a graphic designer, and an investigative journalist. And the most significant of these was working as an archivist for several artist estates, including a number of very famous photographers. She has a master's in library science with a concentration in archival processing and description, has way too many cameras, and fears her enormous LP record collection will be the death of her someday. Okay, great. So I am now going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Jodi.
Hello. This is Telling Transit Stories, and this is an exhibit that we put together to sort of demystify the collecting mission of the New York Transit Museum and highlight some of the things that we have acquired in the post-COVID landscape. Even though COVID is still around, it is not a pandemic anymore. So our donations and acquisitions slowed to a crawl during this time, but we did manage to get our hands on some super cool things, and I'm really excited to share them with you today. So the first thing that I'm going to do is show you this. The first thing we're going to be talking about is the Wanamaker vest pocket. And before I show that to you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wanamaker and how Wanamaker stores were sort of the vanguard of retail. They were based in Philadelphia, and John Wanamaker was a guy who wanted to make retail palaces. And we have here on the wall a business card from the Grand Depot. So you can see that Wanamaker is already thinking in terms of trains because he called his flagship store a depot. Wanamaker decided that since the Grand Depot was so successful in Philadelphia, he wanted to try it here in New York City. And the place where he decided to build this Grand Depot of New York City was right around Union Square, a little bit below. And so if we go over here, back at the turn of the century, or slightly before the turn of the century, the line of demarcation was 14th Street. So most people lived and worked below 14th Street. Street grids were laid out, and so Wanamaker felt that to have his store slightly below 14th Street at around 8th Street, which is, I know, not really slightly below, but in New Yorkers, we walk everywhere. It's like a 5-minute walk, no biggie. So he decided that since there was already a department store on this block, 555, if you don't know, all land in New York and indeed everywhere else on the planet is divided up into a block and lot system. So this is the block 555, and 554 is another block that we're going to be talking about. And it's subdivided into little lots. Hilton Hughes and Denning had a retail palace in block 555, and Wanamaker decided that's where I'm going to start my retail empire in New York. And he took it over when they went out of business. And this was around 1890, 1891. And you can see in this map from 1891, Wanamaker has block 555 now. The other store that was on that site was the Iron Palace from A.T. Stewart. So it had a long history of being a retail, and Wanamaker was like, good, it's sort of turnkey, I'm moving in. But that wasn't enough for him. Wanamaker decided that he wanted to have another part of his retail empire on block 554. And if you show them the block again, you can see that it's subdivided into a whole bunch of different things, including the Germania Theater. And so slowly but surely, Wanamaker starts making deals with these lot owners to either buy their property outright or get easements from them. But he kind of comes across some issues there because this site is also a key part in the city's plan for building the first subway line. And so he starts talking to William Barclay Parsons, who is the engineer who is designing the subway system at that point. He is the godfather of the subway. And there's a long, protracted discussion between Wanamaker and Parsons. Parsons is trying to convince Wanamaker not to buy this land, but to let the Board of Transportation, their predecessor, to let the Board of Rapid Transit Commissioners buy it. Wanamaker says, no way, I'll buy this land and I will give you permission to build on it. I'll give you an easement. And so this bickering goes back and forth for several years. And if you come this way, you can see eventually these discussions go on. And in December 1901, Parsons makes this proposal to Wanamaker and the remaining property owners that are here. You can see Broadway Trust Company still owns a little corner. And Wanamaker has all of this by now, and they have that. And Parsons's proposal to Wanamaker is that they will build the subway station below his store to help make his store more easily accessible to people taking the subway. Wanamaker likes this idea, but that expression, if you give an inch, they'll try to take a mile. And that's exactly what Wanamaker does. Wanamaker ends up getting the Rapid Transit Construction Company to underpin both of his buildings, to give him a subway station where there is an entrance into his store. By the way, the store is not even open when the first subway opens. Subway opens in 1904. Wanamaker's store doesn't open until 1907. And so this is already pre-building everything because there's this anticipation that Wanamaker is going to have all these great people coming. And the subway construction company is like, well, we know everybody's going to use the subway. So sure. If you come over here, I feel like I'm making you go back and forth. Here's a photograph from the 50s of the Wanamaker's entrance in the Astor Place subway station. You could see the awesome neon sign that they have. And the entrance is still there, but it is on the downtown side. There was a passageway that went from the uptown side also, so you could walk underneath the tracks up into the entrance, but that passageway closed sometime in the 80s. So Wanamaker opens in 1907. In 1908, he takes out all of these ads, which you can see some of them here, basically saying, and in 1908, the tunnel between Brooklyn and Manhattan is open. So this is really a boon for Wanamaker to say, oh, if you live in Brooklyn, it's going to take you 5 minutes to go to Wanamaker's because the subway is there. Basically now Wanamaker's is also in Brooklyn. And this is one of the earliest instances of a retail outlet using the subway as a selling point for convenience in getting to buy their merchandise. So you may be saying, why are you telling me all this history about Wanamakers and all the cool things that happen around building the store and the station? Take us to the map. So this is what I'm going to show you right now. This here is the very first subway map. Here's it. We've enlarged it so you can kind of get close to it when you come to the exhibit. And this is the first subway map ever. It was first printed in 1904. This example that we have is from 1908 because it has a red stamp on the top that says the direct entrance to the store is now open. They didn't print more than, they didn't print it twice, they just printed it once, and they did the overprint afterwards. So now, Wanamaker's, who was a store that pioneered lots of firsts, they were the first to have a telephone, they were the first to have price tags, was also the first to have a subway map. And you see Astor Place, Wanamaker's very prominently, and it's there too. So this was something that was donated to us by a man named Peter Lloyd, who is the map guru. Everything that there is to know about the New York City subway map, he knows or is in the process of knowing. And so I was very excited that he donated this to us on the occasion of the museum's birthday, which is July 4th. So that was super cool. I was very excited to get it. Everybody was excited to see it because there's not that many of them around. Because something from 1904 that is supposed to be a piece of ephemera that you folded up and put in your pocket, you wouldn't expect something to last that long. And the one that Peter sent us is a pristine example of this map. It hasn't ever been folded either. So thank you, Peter. Going on with the theme of maps, this lady over here is named Joan Charysyn. And Joan is somebody whose name you may not know, but you are definitely familiar with the work that she did. And if you care to show them, pretty much everybody knows what they're looking at. This is the 1972 Unimark map. I won't call it Vignelli because Vignelli is not the only person who worked on this map. Anyone who's ever worked in graphic design knows that projects such as this are collaborative. Unimark's principals were Massimo Vignelli and Bob Norda, and they got a lot of the credit for this map, but Joan Charysyn were the hands that did the mechanical work for this map. And she was subsequently left out of a lot of conversations about this map, which is sad because Joan is an excellent designer and draftsperson. And that was borne out by the fact that after she left Unimark in 1974, the MTA hired her and she did this, which is a commuter rail system map. And you can see that it is not just what MTA rail is now. You see the Long Island Railroad, you see Staten Island Rapid Transit, which is a railroad and not a subway. The Hudson Line, Harlem, and New Haven Line, which are now parts of Metro North, were all separate, run by Conrail at that time or Penn Central. Erie, Lackawanna, and PATH, Port Authority Trans Hudson here. You can see when you look at this map, it is very similar to the Unimark map of 1972 for reasons that should be obvious because Joan made this. Joan donated both of these to us after she saw that we had talked about her in depth in our exhibit about the 50th anniversary of the Unimark map. And one of the cool things that she gave us, in addition to these, was a terminal directory of Grand Central circa 1975. And this is something that I had never seen before, and most of the people that I have shown it to had never seen it before either. And that's super cool for us, and you can kind of see how different the terminal is today compared to this. This is a diagram made before any of the modern updates to the terminal were made. So before Metro North took over in 1983, which was the first major renovation of the terminal, and also way before the second major renovation of the terminal. So there's all the passageways are named. The museum is right around here. And I like how there's an arrow for parking because that parking is no longer there. I'm supposed to be talking about how we acquire stuff and why we collect what we collect. So what Peter sent us, the map, the Wanamaker map, is something that we had always wanted to have in our collection, but never had the opportunity. We never came across it on our own, and when they did show up at auction, for instance, they were a little out of our price range. So that's, one of the limitations that we have at the museum is we have a limited budget in which to buy things. So when we do buy things, we have to choose very carefully. So Peter donated something that we wanted, we got to check off the box. What Joan sent us are things that we in the cases of these, we knew that they existed because they're station size. And over here, I can show you a picture of what they looked like in situ, because they were part of the whole Unimark identity. So see, this is how it was meant to be exhibited in a station. So there would be the large size map and then strip maps for both directions of trains, inbound and outbound. So we knew that those existed for both, but the terminal we didn't. And after Joan had been made aware that she was one of the stars of our Unimark map exhibit, she actually called me on the phone, and I was very pleased and surprised to hear from her. And after a chat, she said, "I have some things to send you. Would you be interested?" And of course, the answer is always yes. We're very interested in seeing what you have to offer. So that is a little non-standard for our collecting mission. Usually, if someone wants to donate things to us, we ask them to send our registrar photographs and kind of an inventory. But in the case of Joan, she told me what she was going to send, and we discussed and said, yes, just have her send them, because we know that we're going to take these into our collection because they are unique to our collection. We don't have them, and they fill a void. So, and they're super cool. It's really nice to see them very big. They're in great condition. And seeing that Grand Central Terminal is also useful for people who are looking at the history of the terminal itself and to see what the terminal looked like circa 1975. There are a lot of candy stores, which is kind of funny, I guess, because of the whole commuter mindset where, maybe you and your partner had a fight when you left for work in the morning, and on your way home, you want to make it up to them by buying them some candy. I don't know. I thought that was kind of funny. It's like 7 or 8 different candy places and a bunch of photo places and a couple of shoe repair. So you could spend quite a bit of time just looking at the different stores that used to be here in the terminal. So that's that. Now we're going to talk about my favorite stuff in our collection, of any part of our collection. I love talking about signs. I will never shut up about signs. There's so much to talk about with signs. So that's what the next 2 things are going to be. Come with me. So one of the things that we also like talking about here at the New York Transit Museum is how our system is always changing. Sometimes station stops get closed because they are no longer needed, because nobody uses them, because of platform lengthening, like what happened at Worth Street and 18th Street in Manhattan. When platforms got extended, there wasn't enough room for trains to have a correct space between them. So they close stations every now and then, just because physically it's impossible to run safe service with them. One of the stations that has been closed because of disuse was Dean Street, and it was a station on the Franklin Avenue shuttle. And it was one of the oldest stations in our subway system because it had been around since the 1800s. Since 1896, it was part of the Kings County Elevated Railway. And the photos that we have here are more modern than 1896. The top one is from 1943, and it's got a photograph of an experimental compartment car called the Zephyr. That was another fun thing about choosing this sign for this exhibit, was so I got to crack open photographs of Zephyrs because they're really cool looking cars. And then down here, it's an AB standard in 1978. So the station kind of fell into disrepair. It was underutilized. It was actually closed once and then reopened because one person complained that he needed to use the station and they should open it again. And they did. And then, you know, more people used it. But historically, it was such an underutilized station. And when it closed, it only had about 25 fares paid every day. So it costs a lot more than what 25 fares will pay to keep a station open and have service there. So it was closed in the 80s and dismantled. So, and this sign, we got this from our friends in Asset Recovery. They are the people who run the memorabilia sales. And I saw this in their sale and I wrote to them and said, hey, can we have that Dean Street sign? Because we don't have one in our collection. And it's also a Subway Standard sign. The way that you can tell that it is Subway Standard and not Helvetica is if you look at the terminals of like an E, see it's slanted. Look at the S, the terminals of the S are slanted. That's a sure sign that you're looking at something that is Subway Standard or its official name, Accidents Grotesque, and not Helvetica. Our friends in Asset Recovery are really good partners because they are the people who take things out of the system that are no longer either safe to be in the system, no longer usable. Like the criteria for signs is that if they are no longer readable, then they have to be taken out and replaced. And that's where we come in, because sometimes they take out things that are of historic interest and also fill a gap in our collection that we don't have. And this sign definitely fills two of the criteria for us, where it is a sign from a station that no longer exists. And it's also a Subway Standard sign, although not the first iteration of a Subway Standard sign, because if it were, it would be black text on a white background. But beggars cannot be choosers. So that's another way that the museum gets things for our collection, especially objects of this nature, is that we have various partners in the MTA, New York City Transit, Long Island Railroad, and Metro North, who offer us things from time to time. Or sometimes we go after them and say, hey, somebody at Long Island Railroad, I see that you are doing renovations on all of these stations, and we would like to know if you have any things that are of historic interest that you are removing from the station. And that's when myself and our collection staff get together and say, oh, you know, this station was built in 1952 and has these kind of light posts, like maybe we can get one for our collection. We don't always get everything that we ask for. Sometimes things get damaged when they're being removed. Can't help it. And sometimes the museum gets a call about things that are being removed too late for us to do anything about it. And sometimes there are things that we would really love to have, but we just don't have the room for it. Things like mosaics or larger decorative pieces that are in the stations, like the rosette roundels that used to hold the light fixtures in a lot of the older stations. We would love to have those, but getting them into our collection space and taking care of them would be kind of problematic. And that's also one of the things I would like to tell you about the museum, is that when we decide to accession something into our collection, it is a legally binding agreement that the museum has promised that while we are in custody of this particular object or archival collection, we will take care of it ensure that it is accessible for people to look at and research with, and that it's stored in proper conditions when it is not on display. So that kind of dictates what things we can and cannot take, because if there's something that is from 1904 that is super duper cool that we would really love to have in our collection, if we cannot take care of it for the life of the object, it's morally not correct for us to take it. It's not ethically correct for us to take it because it'll just sit and rot. And that's not really what a museum is supposed to do, which is why oftentimes we get offered things where we have to say no because it's either too large for us to care for in a real honest way, it's too degraded and would require too much conservation for us to keep in our collection. That happens a lot with papers. People offer us a lot of archival collections that are full of paper that's just crumbling and to dust, where if we even tried to preserve it, it would fall apart in our hands. And it's a shame because there's lots of things that are lost because there's just no way for us to preserve them. But we do give lots of things very serious thought before we say yes or no. And if we say no to something, there's always a very good reason why. I hope that was somebody's question because I just answered it and now I don't have to answer it again. So I told you about Dean Street, and now I'm going to tell you about the rest of the signs in our exhibit, which I feel like this whole talk has been me telling you how excited I was for this stuff to come in, which is true because I love when we get cool stuff. But what I'm going to show you next is something that I was incredibly excited to have offered to us and accessing because it filled a lot of criteria that we look for when we are trying to accession things. It was not represented in our collection. It's surface transit. It's earlier surface transit than motor buses, and they just look freaking cool. And that's this is only a portion of the trolley route designation signs that we were given as part of a collection from a gentleman, David Ure. And I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. So the collection of signs that he gave us is from all modes of transportation. But I was very excited about these because in previous exhibits, when I wanted to show trolley signs, we had to borrow them from other people because we did not have a collection of our own. And pretty much as soon as the last exhibit closed that I had to borrow a trolley sign from, this collection landed on our doorstep. And the day that I saw the cart full of the objects, I got very excited because these are all from the Third Avenue Railway System, or TARS. And so TARS ran trolley cars in Manhattan and the Bronx and a small portion of Lower Westchester until 1948 or so. And these are just 4 of, I think, the 35 signs that we got. They're double-sided. We only chose to show one side of each one. And each route designation that is displayed has a photograph showing it in situ. And I want to focus on the Bailey Avenue one for a second, because if you look closely, you can see inside the negative space of the B, you have a BX and a 24. It's hard to see. Maybe we should get a different angle on those, see it a little bit better. So the BX and the 24 are the motor bus route that the Bailey Avenue B line from Third Avenue Railways was going to become when the switch happened from trolleys to motor buses. So in the middle of 1948, all of the signs for routes that were going to transition over to motor buses had their new name painted on it so that they can show people that at one day soon, the B is going to disappear and it's going to be the BX24. So I think that's kind of a little genius way of getting people ready for the change. And they're super cool to look at. You can see the way that they attach to the trolley with one spike on top, two on the bottom. We have a photograph on the wall that shows one of the streetcars in the middle of a sign change, and you can see exactly one peg on top, two on the bottom. And this trolley also has the BX39, which is what the University Avenue line changed into. We also have the 6 from Tuckahoe, which is in Lower Westchester, and 2 examples of crosstown route designations. Usually crosstowns were designated with an X, like 207th Street, but 180th Street crosstown was Z. I am not sure why it was chosen as a C. There were a couple other crosstown lines that were also not X. I am still digging into surface transportation, having spent most of my time with subways. So when I solve that mystery, it will go into the cataloging for this. And then when somebody asks me, I could be like, oh, it was called Z because of blah, blah, blah. But I don't know that right now. So these were sort of the of his collection that he gave us, but David also gave us some awesome route designations for the New York, Westchester, and Boston train lines, which are now the Dyer Avenue line subway. So we've got Harlem River, 180th Street, White Plains, and there's some photographs of what New York, Westchester, and Boston stations look like. And if you live in the Bronx, these stations should be familiar to you, especially if you take a train. And East 180th Street Station is something really special. It is the former offices of the New York, Westchester, and Boston. It's an Italian Renaissance style building, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places. And in case you were curious about where the New York, Westchester, and Boston went, here are stations that became the Dyer Avenue line on a hand-drawn map that we had from our collection. And last, but certainly not least, one of the signs that David's collection had was something that I think is a really cool mystery. Show them what it is first. And you may be looking at that and say, but Jodi, Woodlawn Road is not a real road. And that's correct. It is not a real road now, but Woodlawn Road is what is now known as Bainbridge Avenue. And so these signs were for high V or low V subway cars, which were the precursors to the modern subway car. They were steel and they were steel cars, and they ran on elevated and underground lines. And they served mostly the Bronx elevateds. And this is a side destination sign. When the first subway line opened in 1904, people in the Bronx were already clamoring for more rapid transit. There was only some rail stations there, like the New York, Westchester, and Boston, and a couple of other steam railways. And people who lived in the Bronx wanted rapid transit. And so the Interborough Rapid Transit Company listened to them and began plotting where the Bronx rapid transit lines were going to go. There was a 3rd Avenue elevated already, which had been around since the 1800s, but they were going to build a new IRT line as an extension of that. So Woodlawn Road is near a cemetery, Woodlawn Cemetery. We've got some maps here that kind of show you, this is an 1890s, circa 1890s map. You can see here, Woodlawn Road is right there. Its mass over here is Woodlawn Cemetery, Van Cortlandt Park is there. And this is around the junction where they have decided that having a subway station would be a good location. It is near the cemetery. Back when the subway was new, cemeteries were still used partly as parks and recreation areas. So having rapid transit go to a cemetery was a plus because it allowed people to go and have a picnic. And if you live in Brooklyn or Queens, near the border of Brooklyn, Queens, you notice there's a lot of cemeteries there and a lot of buses go there. If you look really close, you can see some trolley poles. That is definitely because cemeteries, before there were a lot of public parks, cemeteries were the public parks of their day, and also places where people had their eternal rest. So Woodlawn Road is here, and if you look here in 1901, it's still Woodlawn Road. Woodlawn Cemetery here. Things are starting to pick up. All of this stuff is being built. And so the need for having rapid transit is growing and growing and growing as the population happens. Plans are put in place, and this is still called Woodlawn Road, but by the time the station opens, the street has already been renamed to Bainbridge Avenue. You see, this is a excerpt of a map from 1911. You see it's called Bainbridge Avenue, but Woodlawn Road is in parentheses. So Bainbridge Avenue is named for William Bainbridge. He's a Navy Commodore, and all of these street names in the general area of Bainbridge Avenue and Woodlawn Cemetery, sometime around 1911, all got renamed to War of 1812 heroes. Heroes in quotes because some of them were heroic for reasons that are no longer acceptable today. So there's Decatur Avenue, there's Perry Avenue, there's Hull Avenue. These are all 1812 guys. So Bainbridge. So Woodlawn Road is already, this is 1911, and the subway line doesn't open until 1913. So by 1913, and this is a map from 1938, so that's way past. Now it's Bainbridge Avenue. But all of the things in the planning say Woodlawn Road. And when the station was opened in 1913, there were even signs that said Woodlawn Road. And indeed, up until maybe 7 years ago, there was still one holdout sign in that station that said Woodlawn Road, like a directional towards Bainbridge that said Woodlawn Road. I've asked many, many people why they kept making signs that said Woodlawn Road when it hadn't been called that since 1911, and nobody could give me a real answer because nobody really knew. I like to think that maybe somebody in the sign shop was just having fun with people and being like, hey, here's this legacy name and let's confuse people. But it's probably not as much fun of an answer as that. It was probably an oversight that the sign needed to get remade, and they just remade it as Woodlawn Road, and they just kept doing it without actually realizing that there were no other Woodlawn Road signs in that station. So that's another thing. We like collecting things that enable us to tell cool stories like the one I just told you, because I don't know how many of you who are listening today knew that there was ever a Woodlawn Road, but now that you've heard me tell you, now you. And I think that's everything that I wanted to show you. I hope you come and visit the exhibit and read the things and look at the pictures on your own. There's a lot of stuff to absorb here. This is just a fraction of it, but 4 stories told through 4 sets of objects, and hopefully it's demystified our collecting mission and our reasons for bringing stuff into our collection. I guess we have some time for questions, so.
Yeah, thank you, Todi. That was great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
And thank you, Hilly, for your wonderful camera work, even though that wasn't your fault, whatever happened to the stabilizer thing. I just want to say that I've seen the exhibit in person. It's well worth the visit, and it's so great to have your commentary on top of all the objects, because it's like stories on top of stories on top of stories, and having just the progression of maps and seeing how areas change over time, but then getting your context, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Everyone loves them.
So we do have a few questions in the chat. The first, someone answered that the subway standard was first introduced in 1970, but is it still used at all for anything?
It is not. Subway Standard was supplanted by Helvetica in the 1990s. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly when in the 90s, but it was adopted because most of the modern sign making equipment that the sign shop has to make signs, you could not install Accidents Grotesque on them. They came with Helvetica. And Helvetica is very close to Subway Standard, Accidents Grotesque. So, but I have to say Unimark chose Subway Standard over Helvetica in their specs because their reasoning was that it was easier to see at low light and different angles than Helvetica was. But Helvetica became the official typeface of the New York City subways in the 90s. It may have actually been 1990. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I should. Somebody in the chat will probably give the exact date, and then I'll feel silly because I should know. But I can't remember everything. I just have to know where to look it up. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. It was a little bit long.
Do you know how long is the exhibit up until?
It is up for most of the year until we take it down to do the holiday train show, and I think that is sometime in November.
Okay, great.
Quote me on that, but it's about the time when so this is the only show here until Holiday Train.
Okay, awesome.
Plenty of time to do it.
So someone asked, what's the furthest the museum has gone to retrieve an item for its collection?
What's the what? It's gone
the furthest, like distance-wise.
Distance-wise, that's a really good question. And in my time here at the museum, I think the furthest that any of our people have gone has been to Maine, I believe. There's stuff that gets sent to us from other places across the country, but like physically going, I think it was Maine. But the Wanamaker map that Peter sent us, Peter sent it from London. So on a technicality, I could say that London is the furthest that we've gone.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so someone asked who they would contact if they had something they wanted to donate. Is there a general email?
That is an excellent question. If you have something that you would like to donate to the New York Transit Museum, on our website, we have a page that explains how to donate, and you will be sending an email to our registrar. And if you guys don't know what a registrar is the person in any museum who is in charge of accessioning and deaccessioning collection items, making sure that things that are loaned out to other institutions get there and are taken care of, or things that are loaned to us they're like the logistical person. So on the museum's website, I think it's in the collections tab, there's something about donations. There's rules about donating things. If you want to donate something, you must follow the rules. You can't just send it to us and be like, take this, because that's not the proper way to do things. And you may be sending us something that we already have and we can't accept it, and then we have to send it back to you. And if you have questions, there's an email address on there that you can ask, like, hey, I've got this. Is this something you'd be interested in? I hope that answers the question.
Great. I wanted to know, is there some kind of Moby Dick or white whale that you wish that we had, but we don't?
I can't speak for anybody else at the museum, but this map here was one of our white whales, so crossed that one off the list.
Sweet.
But there are things in other museums' collections that I wish were in ours, and that would be the silver shovel and the silver hand controls from the groundbreaking of the subway and from the first subway train that went through the tunnels. Those are both in the collection of the Museum of the City of New York. I wish they were ours, but they belong to them. I'm hoping one day maybe they decide that they want to give them to us. I know that that is a pipe dream, but a girl can dream. But as far as attainable things for our collection, I would really love for us to have more process drawings for things like all of the subway maps. I'm very interested in process. So things that show the thought process behind why certain things were designed a certain way, or even for the decorations that are in some of the subway stations, like why certain stations have tulips instead of peonies on their ornamental decorations. For me as a curator, I would love to have stuff because those are also good stories for us to tell, and they're tangible objects that we have in our collection. So to be able to tell more things about the things that we already have, that's what I'm always hoping for. But yeah, if anyone here from MC is from MCNY.
So someone, I had put the link, and I'll put it again, to the online catalog. Someone asked, is there a way people can view objects in the archives? And I would think that that would be the best way.
Yeah. It's a portion of our collection. It's only, I think the catalog shows maybe 70 or 80,000 things, but we have many, many more things than that in our collection. We have about 1 million things, maybe even more. It's hard to get a full count because some of the photographic collections are hundreds of thousands of things. But yeah, if you want to get an idea of the cross section of things that we do have, the online catalog is the best way to get a handle on.
And we did have a kind of massive question that I think is just a short yes, and but it did rapid transit lead to community expansions like in the rest of North America? And I think it's a huge yes, but maybe how does that connect to what's in the exhibit? Or
Well, I mean, I think in this particular exhibit, we're not really showing that much of that particular effect of transit. In our next exhibit, we will. In the previous exhibit to this, which was about the Metro North, we showed a little bit of that, and our exhibit about the Bronx, it was called Building the Bronx, which is basically how the Bronx became what it was because of the expansion of rapid transit. We've also had an exhibit about the IRT Flushing line, and basically Queens is the way it is because they built a subway line that went through it. So it's maybe not as present in this exhibit, but it's present in many, many other exhibits that we do at the New York Transit.
yeah, I mean, even just the succession of all those maps showing how different areas are built. It's from the map perspective, not the human perspective, but I think that's implicit.
Just seeing the changing built environment above the subway, is fascinating. And, through those block and lot maps, you can really see, retail blocks changing into residential blocks and retail blocks springing up where there was nothing before. So transit definitely has an effect on all of that. It's just not as apparent in this example.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, so I think that was the last question in the chat. So I'm just going to close us out. I want to thank Jodi again just for the amazing overview of the exhibit and the exhibit itself. You should really go and see it. There's more information about visiting both of our museum locations and our 3 stores on our website. I also want to tell you about some of our upcoming programs, which you can find on our website calendar. This Thursday at the museum, we're celebrating the 190th anniversary of the Long Island Railroad. And that's a very long history. And that long history is going to be featured by Elizabeth Moore, who will be speaking at the museum. So tickets are still available. I'm going to put a link into the chat directly to that program. We also have the end of this month, May 31st, we have tickets left to our 2nd Avenue walking tour that looks at both the contemporary artwork and transit history of that area. So I'm going to send a link to our calendar as well into the chat. And we'd love to see you at the museum if you're in town. Here are links for visit. And then also, if you enjoyed the program, please consider becoming a member or making a donation so that we can have programs like these and feature these wonderful transit stories. So thank you again for joining, and I hope everyone has a great day.